We are considering to further enhance our presence in the eastern part of the alliance. This could include the deployment of additional NATO battle groups.
That is the latest from NATO's Secretary General as the West tries to send stronger signals to Russia. Toomas Hendrik Ilves is certainly familiar with the impact Russia has already had on Ukraine. He was president of Estonia between 2006 and 2016, and that includes the time when Russia annexed Crimea. Mr. Ilves is in Estonia. Sir, thank you so much for coming on Power and Politics.
Great. Happy to be here.
So lots going on today. U.S. and European leaders are meeting today. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says the alliance is considering reinforcing its borders. And on top of that, allies are readying frigates, fighter jets, and troops. So what does all of that suggest to you about where this crisis is headed?
Well, since NATO is not going to put troops into Ukraine itself, I mean, these are clearly measures to bolster the defense of those countries in Europe closest to Russia. So we're talking about Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania. And it is a step to show that NATO is serious about defending its allies, especially given the demand of the Russian side in their ultimatum that basically all NATO troops leave anyone who's joined after 1997.
What do you think? How would the deployment of more NATO troops be received in Estonia in particular?
Oh, I think very positively. There's no anti-NATO sentiment here, and I trust that's true of all of the countries that we have mentioned.
What kind of reinforcements do you think Estonia needs? What would they want to see?
Well, I think armor and anti-armor is probably the one thing that is probably needed most, given the terrain here. We do have air policing here already from NATO, and so I would say those are the main things. Of course, there would be boots on the ground, to use the technical term.
Estonia's prime minister has said that the biggest deterrence to Russia would be the American flag. So more U.S. forces in the Baltics is the answer. Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't really differentiate between between NATO allies in this regard, insofar as some of the most stalwart allies we've had have been, for example, countries like Denmark. Yes and no. I mean, right now with the distribution of labor, or the division of labor in our region, is that the UK is in Estonia, Canada is in Latvia, Germany is in Lithuania, and the United States is in Poland.
What's your take on things at this moment? Do you still have faith in the diplomatic process, or do you believe a Russian attack on Ukraine is imminent?
Well, I mean, first off, I mean, the ultimata that were delivered they're just impossible. I mean, it's clear. Everyone knows that NATO can never say we will not take new members. And even if there were an attempt to get a deal between, say, one party, the United States, and the other, Russia, it would require a treaty change in the North Atlantic Treaty, and basically you would never get the members to ratify that. So that was a non-starter from the beginning. Similarly, with the demand that NATO take out its equipment and troops from countries that joined NATO after 1997. So basically what we're looking at is a non-starter from the get-go. We're going to just demand something we know absolutely is impossible to fulfill, but then we have the cover saying, see, you didn't meet our demands, and therefore we're going to do something now. Now, how much whether they're going to invade Ukraine or not is a big discussion. mean, certainly all of the signs of moving massive amounts of troops and armor and other materiel to the region. There are amphibious assault ships on their way there right now. I mean, all of it looks pretty grim.
Given that Russia knows that what they were asking for was a non-starter, even before NATO told them it was a non-starter, what do you think the end game is here?
Well, possibly to intimidate Ukraine to meet their demands, but which clearly is not going to happen, given the spirit and the attitudes in Ukraine at the moment. Anyone who would even propose that would be laughed at. Now, then, of course, there have been reports both from the United Kingdom and from the United States that there is also this apparently this plan to basically a regime change and take some people from Ukraine and then install them in a puppet regime. That I personally, again, knowing so many Ukrainians and people in Ukrainian politics, I don't see how that could possibly work. I mean, you would basically be treated as a quisling from day one. So, I mean, it's there aren't many alternatives for them, and sort of the easy one is, in some sense, is to just try to intimidate militarily.
What are the folks you know in Ukraine telling you? How are they feeling, just on a personal level?
Determined, I would say. The people who I talk to basically say, this is our country, we're going to defend it. And, if you basically, the transformation of Ukraine in the past 8 years since the Russians invaded is quite astounding. I mean, it is really, there's this old theory that war creates nations. Well, this is a perfect instantiation of a country that was not completely integrated domestically 8 or 9 years ago, that today things such as language differences, different political attitudes really have been consolidated. And so I think we're going to see a rather determined, or we do have a rather determined Ukraine at this moment. And when I ask, well, do other people feel this way? Then they say, well, everyone they know feels the same way. And when you also look at reportage from there, where you see sort of women in their 50s practicing in their camouflage suits to defend their homeland, it's quite inspiring and even kind of emotional.
Much more to discuss, of course, as the situation unfolds, sir, but I very much appreciate your perspective and your time.
Well, thank you, and have a good evening.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.